On it. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share a talk about a review of the state of the DEX markets. I'm Danning Sui. I'm a data scientist at Flashbots. Before Flashbots, I worked at 0x, which is one of the DEX platform in the space. And so today in the talk, I want to cover a bunch of topics. So I have a bunch of slides and a bunch of charts, so hopefully I can cover all of them, about looking into, say, like, what are the front ends that are mostly dominating right now, and like what are the use cases that we've seen in the past 1 or 2 years, and how does the execution quality compare across different DEX, which actually has been a thing that people always talk about, marketing about on Twitter, but no one have really seen the data to really justify it, and some cross-chain trends as well. Yeah, this is agenda rundown. So first, we'll have like a recap of how did the DEX space evolved over time, and then we'll look at who's the king of DEX order flow right now on Ethereum specifically, and compare across the specifically solver-based DEX, who has the best pricing. This is from one of the paper we published earlier this year, and then a few charts about other use cases and across chain, and last but not least, a very interesting study we just published yesterday with Flashbots about the spam problem on L2 specifically base. So this is my view of how DEX trading has evolved over time in the space. In 2016, 2017, when Ethereum just came out, there is order book DEX came out like Ether Delta, and they were basically following the TradFi model, where basically if there's a taker and a maker, there's potentially also a relayer trying to match the order, and if there's a match, then the order settles on chain. Initially, people were putting order book on chain, which turns out to be very not gas efficient, and then everyone kind of adopted the model of like, how to say, off-chain order book, but on-chain settlement. And so around 2018, when like Uniswap finally came out, they proposed a really novel model to basically solve kind of like the fragmentation of liquidity issue, where they basically price all the assets in the curve and where everyone can just deposit it in, and it's a unified liquidity pool. So it's much easier to basically take liquidity from the pool. But that comes out with a lot of problems, right? Like when you access price on the curve, it's very possible that there could be other people actually end up having a better price before you if they paid a higher gas, or they were basically trying to front run you in the mempool when they saw your transaction. And like going on, there is more and more, how to say, more professional people who are coming into the DeFi space and say, you should also adopt like RFQ liquidity. So request for quote as for RFQ, which is basically where there's a market maker who they have a lot of inventory on centralized exchange, and they say, hey, I can provide a better price than Uniswap AMM liquidity, and I would like to like provide a better quote for you. And so RFQ, how to say, liquidity comes into the play. And at this point, we again have liquidity fragmentation problems. So 0x, 1inch, they all kind of like shifted towards a DEX aggregator model. So now they're saying like there is order book, there is AMM, there's RFQ. How can I really like price the best for the user? I'm going to try to aggregate across all the liquidity sources and trying to find the best price for user. So that's when there's RFQ adoption and there's like aggregator model starting to shift. And pretty much around 2022, when CowSwap came out, they were saying aggregation makes a lot of sense, but what if we also created some competition around solvers and outsource that job from just the one single entity, say 1inch or 0x using their own router? Instead, we just basically put an auction on top of it and say, hey, anyone, if you have a good routing algorithm, tell me what's the best price. And so that's basically the whole solver model DEX model that came out. Later on, 1inch adopted as well, pushed their fusion model, and then Uniswap also had Uniswap X. And at the same time, there's also like wallets and others who are basically starting to trying to basically put this use case within their interface, right? So MetaMask started this like meta aggregator model where they will check all the aggregators and they find the best price, and they will keep the user within the UI and say, if you want to do swap, do MetaMask swap. And they charge a high instant fee, but user really don't care and they like the convenience. So this is where we are right now. And 2025, what are the new things? More and more DEX starting to adopt also order flow auctions. So basically say, okay, we've had price aggregated, but now we could also have searchers potentially background our users' orders, potentially extract MEV in a not harmful way, and potentially give a kickback or like refunds back to user to enhance the pricing. So now it's a trend of like DEX with OFA. For example, like CowSwap, they launched a thing called map blocker, which is one of the biggest competitor to what Flashbots launched, which called map share. It's a similar idea, but the end goal is to increase the execution quality for a user. And this year, another big topic would be Uniswap v4 hook pools, which is potentially innovating and like free up a lot of customization for user, for projects to basically improve and potentially also protect the liquidity providers. So we'll see if they can have like a bigger adoption in the coming month. So that was the rambling, pretty long, but I want to take a quiz in the room. So with this, kind of like recap of all these players in the space, who do you think has the most retail adoption today? And when I ask this question specifically, it's not about just like the DEX volume settled on chain, because that could represent more like, AML liquidity can be easily multi-hopped multiple times when user swap a less popular token A to token B. Like the router will do like A to west and then west to B, and so the volume easily inflated. But here we're talking about, like how much trading volume were requested as a demand from retail front ends. Does anyone have any guess to take? Yes? Uniswap? Oh, okay. I think you know the answer, but you're helping me to play a straw man. So, so we have answer in orderflow.art, and this is a website we're trying our best to basically index all the front-end volume. I want to make caveats here because I'm a data person. I don't want to do chart crime. Currently, it's a little bit out of maintenance that it's representing 1-inch fusion charts wrongly. So there's a portion of 1-inch fusion is not represented there. But per my manual check, even combining that, CowSwap turns out to be the biggest one in the front end right now. And I checked that there are trade sides buckets as well. It turns out it's not really like I was suspecting if it's like one entity trading a large amount of wash trading. Not really. The trading, sides bucket actually grow pretty proportionally. So seems not actually very organic growth. But yeah, one thing in this diagram I want to highlight though is that when you zoom into the whole like DEX supply chain today, it's very sophisticated and it's pretty mature as a segment, where what we mentioned earlier, when the front end actually got the user request, they go to a bunch of solvers, and a bunch of solvers might route across AMM and RFQ market makers. They may simply just be a market maker directly, giving quotes and vertically integrated. And then they actually all goes through like a order flow auction to potentially get another batch of like background attached, and then it goes to block builders. Sometimes the solver may have a direct deal with the block builders, and so a lot of these transactions are going to private mempool now. So like it's never seen in public mempool, because people now realize more and more that MEV is harmful and you should just not like giving up all these value freely. So one data here is showing that basically over time, the private mempool adoption has grown up to 40% transaction today now across all the Ethereum transaction. So basically, the mempool are kind of drying up or like dying a little bit, and that actually gives a lot of implication as well. I think it's good and bad. Good in the way that like the apps and front end are trying to internalize and recapture and distribute the value of MEV rather than just giving it up to searchers. But the bad part is that I think like with less and less transactions are being in the mempool, it actually gives a lot of problem for gas estimation for people who to trying to understand like what's the next block's gas actually going to be. Yeah, and then another chart here just basically to show that. So if we want to zoom into the OFA market share, how does it look like? There is not very good data out there, except that Merkle OFA has a public endpoints that Flashbots we are scraping, and we're trying to like put them into public goods into Dune, and also MapBlocker has their data on Dune, and we also upload Flashbots Protect data there. We can see pretty much like Merkle right now has a 3 to 5% of all the Ethereum transaction flow exclusively. And MEV Blocker also have around 2%, similar to Flashbots Protect, but there is actually a 30% chunk there that we don't know who they are. But we know that it wasn't seen in public mempool. So it could be another OFA from like the MetaMask smart transaction OFA, or could be, Blink, which is another big OFA. It could also be a direct, exclusive deal that they're sending towards block builder like Titan or Beaver. But yeah, I would love to see more data on that. If you, measure this percentage in a different way by looking at how much retail transactions DEX volume, it's way more prominent. It's around 70% and more. And this trend is just like going up and only higher. So yeah. So with all these sophistication, right, and we still don't know if any DEX is doing better than others or providing better price. You see all these DEX fighting on Twitter. If you're in that DEX corner of the Twitter, crypto Twitter, you can see like Uniswap thinks like CowSwap settlement is too slow, and actually is basically a false index of like having good price. CowSwap thinks no, like Uniswap X is like this and that, and then the Uniswap data scientists came out and be like, this is wrong. So that's pretty much part of the motivation why we want to do a study in terms of like a pricing comparison. A few other reasons just to lay out the context from end to end is that, so for any DEX user today, right, like you go to a website and you have a quoted price shown in the UI. Maybe like if you're a slightly more sophisticated or advanced user, you might even go to multiple front ends and trying to check if the price looks better on one or the other. But what does that really mean? It doesn't even guarantee still the final execution. If you look at this mental model from like 0x a few years ago, it kind of lay out how does the pricing go through the whole process. So first of all, you see a midpoint price, and then you have to add like a LP fee of the pool. And then there's price impact, which means like the bigger the trade size you have to go down the ticks or basically like go down the curve, and your average price or basically like final price of the order is going to be worse. And at that point, that's the quoted price you're seeing in the front-end UI. But that's still not guaranteed if you're accessing an AMM liquidity, right? So then now you send it to mempool, and then there's searchers looking at your transaction and being like, oh, this transaction is moving the price off this pool compared to another pool. There's an arbitrage opportunity. I'm gonna basically do something, maybe push up the price further and then like dump it after. Or maybe I'll just simply arbitrage. And so there could be also another person just, not malicious at all, but like just trading at the same direction, but they paid a way higher gas fee. And they will go before you, and then they will push the price further. So you will have a lot of like slippage, and coming from both trade collision and also MEV. So in the very end, the amount you see in the wallets is like very different from the UI. So another thing is also like we see all these like solver model that's going on, but none of them really achieve the the initial idea of like a decentralized auction. Because even today, Uniswap X, 1inch Fusion, CowSwap, they get the quotes from the solver. Their backend decide which one is the best solver. How do we really know if it's like transparently that solver actually had the best price? Or you could imagine maybe one of the solver has a deal with them. They might promote them when even they are like 2 bips worse than others, right? So another thing we usually talk about is that how decentralized are these platforms are, because that could be a potential approximation of how much of the competition are and the pricing as well. So when we look at Uniswap X, 2 market makers making 90% of volume, 1inch Fusion, slightly better, 3 market maker making 80% volume. And CowSwap actually is the most decentralized one. There's one top 1 market maker, obviously we know the name is Wintermute, is making 25% volume. And then next 5 indie solver, I call them, which means just like simply they're not market makers, are making around 10% each. And so you would maybe suspect, okay, CowSwap might have the best price, maybe comparing across all these models. So yeah, actually one update on this data is that I checked it just 2 days ago. And in the last 30 days, Barter, which is not a market maker, now actually taken over Wintermute. So I'm like really happy actually, because like when we look at all these like MEV, DEX, PBS data, you realize all these market makers like everywhere, like they're kind of like the problem of everything being centralized. But I'm really happy like seeing one like non-market maker team is actually taking over the place of a like a market maker. So yeah, this meme is just basically saying like everyone's like these days when they see price go down, it's like, okay, what are you doing, Wintermute? Are you dumping? So I hope that's not going to be the end of the DeFi story. So. Yeah, we know a few other things about these solver models in like a descriptive level. So when you look at like group by the liquidity type across CowSwap in 1inch Fusion Uniswap X, you realize actually all these auction platform doesn't really possess exact the same like liquidity provider and like composition, right? And so Uniswap X, in my opinion, really was like a strategy move for Uniswap to incorporate RFQ liquidity, because they came out, Uniswap AMM pool design, and their universal routes are only routes across Uniswap V2, V3 pool. Over the whole time in the past few years, they didn't really have access to market maker. So I think Uniswap X really is a way for them to tap into RFQ liquidity. And at the same time, CowSwap, like started with all these advocate in like hackathon and have like indie projects to start building as a solver. And so you simply see a lot of AMM liquidity on their platform instead. We also know overall that like what type of profile of assets different liquidity likes to, market make on. We know the professional market makers, they would like to avoid like high risk profile assets. Then easily you will see most of the long tail tokens are provided by AMM type of liquidity. And when you go down to like the major token type like Ethereum or BTC backed, pegged pairs, there will be more and more presence of private market makers. So we finally did this like study to basically compare the pricing with a theoretical price or a simulated price. So we looked at 6 months of data across all these platforms, and we did a simulation against the V2 and V3 pool for the most, highest liquidity pool for this asset. Obviously, this approach is still very limited in my opinion, where you can't really simulate the routing algorithm across the current best like modern aggregators. So what we are measuring here as a benchmark really is just the C-level of naive routing across one biggest major like V2 or V3 pool. And also we're simulating against basically the end of the block price for last block, or you can think it as like the top of block price for the current block. It's also kind of tricky if how you measure the gas assumption, because like it can actually flip the final results and stuff. But yeah, are the results. So we picked also 2 major token pair as the symbolic pair. For the major asset, we looked at USDC and the WETH pair. And this box plot kind of shows that basically CowSwap, 1inch, Uniswap all have basically positive execution quality warfare compared to V2 AMM pool, and barely or maybe even slightly worse compared to V3. But we also compared that Binance markout. I wouldn't say it means that it's comparing with Binance execution, because it's only really mid-price comparison, but just as a benchmark as well. Okay, but if you look at this chart, you would say, okay, Uniswap seems like even worse than just go directly to V3, right? I would say not really. We really need to look into like the distribution controlling the trade size as well. So here we kind of see actually if we expand the charts by like trade size, all of them actually have a pretty good price improvement when the trade size goes bigger, and especially go up to like 300K. But a lot of those negative results were actually coming from the noise from small trade size, which is likely because of like gas inefficiency and etc. So yeah, and then if you look at a V3, the results is very much less prominent because basically V3 pool are very highly, concentrated compared to V2. So it's actually much harder for all these solver platforms to compete over even like naive routing of V3. So yeah, we also then looked at the Pepe pair. The results looks very different in terms of the shape, but overall it fits our assumption where when you see the liquidity pool is very concentrated on V2, it's harder to compete it to have a better price than V2. But meanwhile, V3 pool for Pepe is much less, concentrated, and that's where you see a lot of like price improvement for those. So yeah, that was pretty much the conclusion. And if you're interested, feel free to check out the paper. So I actually have a lot more charts to go through, so I'm going to speed up. But so what are the other new use cases growing on DEX? We look at this like whole chart trend across time. Pretty much a year and a half ago when I was showing this chart, we were very excited saying, oh, like Telegram bots become a new thing now. But little over a year after, you see they're kind of dying down, particularly on Ethereum. Because really, like when you look at Telegram bots volume, and it's mostly on Solana, and some are on Base and actually Binance recently. But also overall, if you look at the trend, they died pretty fast. They come fast and they die fast after Trump and Libra, peak around the beginning of this year. Okay, but also, even though they died, the Telegram bots are still printing a lot of money. The biggest bot by volume today is Trojan bot, and they are still making around like $250,000 every year, every day, and they're projects to around like 100 million annual revenue, even on these flat days. So yeah, another trend I'm seeing is that there is more and more integration of swaps in cross-chain bridges and all these cross-chain swap solutions. I showed this chart about like layer 0 having all these crazy airdrop snapshot and then like die down right after. Somebody actually pointed out that this number might be wrong because layer 0 have a lot of like bridges under it. So for example, like Stargate, they actually are still the highest volume, bridge today per my check on DeFi Llama. So yeah, and when I zoom into like the cross-chain swaps data, it turns out I would say most of these are still like stable. So even it's cross-chain swaps, it's still more like a bridging use cases as I understand today. Yeah. So one last thing I want to talk about within the last 1 minute, but very interesting, is that we try to look into all the DEX swaps profile into layer 2 as well. But we realized actually spam is actually the most important or basically pressing problems right now on L2 because they're cheap. So here are a few charts just to go through. We know that Base has been scaling up their gas throughput the whole time, and now it's like 35 million gas per second throughput. But if you look, respectfully, and like if you identify all those spam transactions, and you realize actually more than half of this gas usage actually are consumed by spam. And even like around end of 2024 to beginning of this year, there's like a flat phase where all these scaled gas usage are all used by spam. There was no actual scaled usage by real users' transactions. So now you would think actually when at layer 2 measuring gas throughput they're scaling, they're not really scaling it effectively because of all these like MEV problems they have to address. So the effective gas throughput here is really around like 20 million gas per second even today. So yeah, we just published this study yesterday, and this is a problem on all these L2s, not just Base. And whenever you have like TVL that's big enough and trading volume big enough, there's MEV and spam problems. So highly recommend to check out this post. Yeah, that's the talk. And any questions, please?
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for an interesting talk. Based on the data you've analyzed, do you have any insights on what in a DEX attracts users and trading volumes?
Yeah, I want to say, so first of all, like a lot of these DEX, they are providing like also the API and solutions. So a lot of time it's a competition among integrating more front end as well. And I want to say, I think the DEX pie overall is still very small and it's very narrative based. Because I feel like a lot of time people just leaning towards the narrative, oh, okay, CowSwap actually has better pricing because they have, their model theoretically going to benefit for bigger trades. And you kind of basically also see accordingly a lot of like whale trades just come to CowSwap. We see like Ethereum Foundation also mentioned they swap on CowSwap. So I think a lot of time it's still, doing research, marketing, and also integrated front ends. Yet we don't know the truth, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great presentation. The 90% of cross-chain transactions of stable to stable, do you think a lot of that's wash trading, or you think it's real?
I doubt it's wash trading when there's no token incentive, but I think it's possible that could be a like rebalancing use case for like market maker or actually like the solver who is trying to land like a cross-chain, bridges and like fills. Yeah, I feel like a lot of those volume may be mixed with like solvers trying to move their assets around. But that's my assumption. I would love to see more analysis.
Great presentation, thank you. What would you need from backends to make sure that there is no collusion between market makers and DEXs?
Right. Yeah. I think I'm not trying to show TE, but I think there could be benefit from like if the solver auction backend posting potentially what are the quotes they got anonymously without like mentioning who are the providers and potentially or some sort of benchmark based saying, hey, this was the highest price, this was the second price, and posting it like either on chain or some like data stream. I think that will be more credible, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it, no? More time? No. Okay, thank you very much, Danning.
Thank you.